If you look at the coronation footage, as the king and queen leave the thrones and head for the exit, you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes.
Under the silence of a London roadside, a police stop turns into something no one is prepared to explain. Inside a car trunk, officers uncover a velvet box linked to Princess Diana, yet the royal vault still holds her tiara. Within hours, a name begins to surface. What began as an inspection now points towards something far deeper, something carefully hidden within royal walls. How can an artifact that never left secure custody suddenly appear outside it? The truth was already moving, and it was about to explode. What do you think is really being hidden behind this discovery, and who benefits if the truth never comes out? Let's know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. A stop that changed everything. It was supposed to be routine. Just another late-night traffic stop on a quiet London road, the kind officers handle without a second thought. The air was cold, the streets nearly empty, and the only sound came from the low hum of a passing engine. When the flashing lights appeared behind the black Mercedes, nothing about the moment suggested it would become something far more serious. The driver, identified as Marcus Hale, slowed down and pulled over. At first glance, there was nothing unusual. His documents were in order. His explanation was simple. He claimed he was transporting items for a job. But something felt off. It was not what he said, but how he said it. His hands trembled slightly as he passed over his license. His voice carried a tension that did not match a routine stop. Officers noticed it immediately. Then came the request that changed everything. They asked him to open the trunk. For a brief moment, Marcus hesitated. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but enough to raise suspicion. When the trunk finally lifted, it revealed nothing dramatic at first glance. A few ordinary items, boxes, a worn suitcase, and then, placed carefully in the corner, a single deep red velvet box. It did not belong with the rest. One of the officers picked it up, turning it slightly under the beam of a flashlight. There was no sound from inside, no movement, no indication of anything valuable. Still, something about it demanded attention. The box was opened slowly. Inside, there was nothing. No jewels, no crown, no metal. Just an empty interior lined with clean white fabric. For a second, it seemed almost disappointing, until the light shifted, revealing a line of delicate gold stitching at the base. The Tiara of Diana. The words hung in the air. In that instant, everything changed. This was no longer about a traffic stop, and it was no longer something local officers could handle alone. The name itself carried weight far beyond the scene. Princess Diana was not just a historical figure. She remained a powerful symbol, deeply tied to public memory, emotion, and national identity. Anything connected to her, especially something as significant as a tiara, was automatically sensitive, protected, and beyond ordinary access. And that was the problem. That tiara was not supposed to be anywhere near a roadside stop. It was meant to be secured, monitored, and untouched inside a royal vault. Untouchable, unreachable, completely accounted for. So how could its name appear here? The officers exchanged glances, their earlier calm replaced by a quiet urgency. One of them stepped aside, speaking into the radio with a lowered voice. Instructions came quickly, sharper than before. The situation had already moved beyond their control. Royal protection needed to be notified immediately. Marcus began to speak again, faster now, trying to explain, trying to distance himself. He insisted he knew nothing, that he had only been hired to transport an item, that he never opened the box. But the more he spoke, the less convincing he sounded. His fear was no longer hidden. It was visible, rising with every word, suggesting that whatever he was involved in went far beyond a simple delivery. Within minutes, the scene shifted. The car was secured. The box was no longer treated as an object, but as potential evidence tied to something much larger. Calls were being made. Lines of authority were being crossed. Because this was no coincidence. Somewhere, something had gone terribly wrong, or exactly as planned. Within minutes, a routine stop transforms into a controlled investigation, the velvet box now evidence of something far deeper. Calls escalate beyond local authority. But was this a mistake that exposed a hidden plan, or the first crack in something carefully orchestrated from within the palace? Let's find out. The truth hidden inside the vault. The urgency from the roadside did not stay there for long. Within minutes, the information reached Kensington Palace, where Prince William was already being briefed. The message was direct and unsettling. A velvet box tied to his mother had been found in the trunk of a car under suspicious circumstances. It was empty, yet marked with a name that carried deep personal and national meaning. There was no hesitation in his response. He gave one clear instruction: inspect the vault immediately. The palace, quiet only moments before, shifted into motion. Security teams were assembled without delay. Specialists were called in, not for routine confirmation, but for something far more precise. This was no longer about checking presence. It was about verifying truth. Deep beneath the palace, the vault was opened. Inside, everything appeared exactly as it should. Resting within its protective glass case, the tiara associated with Princess Diana reflected the soft overhead lighting. To the untrained eye, it looked untouched. Perfect. Exactly where it had always been. For a brief moment, there was a sense of relief. Perhaps the discovery on the roadside was nothing more than a strange coincidence or an attempt to mislead. But that feeling did not last. Prince William stood, at a distance, his gaze fixed, his expression controlled. He did not accept appearances. He ordered a full examination, one that went beyond what the eye could see. Experts moved in carefully. Advanced scanning equipment was brought forward. Every detail was studied: the structure, the weight, the surface of each stone. Nothing was left unchecked. Time passed in heavy silence. Then the shift came. The findings were delivered quietly, but the impact was immediate. The tiara inside the case was not the original. It was a replica. Not a crude imitation, but a highly sophisticated copy designed to deceive even trained observers. The cuts of the stones were different under magnification. The materials did not match historical records. It had been crafted with modern precision, replacing something far older and far more significant. The room changed in an instant. What had seemed secure was no longer certain. What had been trusted was now in question. This was not a break-in from the outside. There were no signs of forced entry, no alarms triggered, no visible disturbance. The vault had remained sealed, yet the truth inside it had been altered. That realization carried a weight far beyond the object itself. Someone had gained access. Someone had known exactly where to look, how to move, and when to act. This required more than opportunity. It required knowledge, planning, and trust from within. The kind of trust that is not easily given. Prince William did not raise his voice. He did not react with visible anger. But the tension in the room shifted sharply. His focus narrowed. This was no longer a question of theft. The original had not simply been taken. It had been replaced without detection. And that meant one thing. The threat was already inside. Silence settled, yet the weight in the room grew heavier as Prince William realized the truth. This was never simple theft. Something had been replaced without detection. If no outsider broke in, then who already inside made it possible, and why now? Keep watching. The name that changed the direction. The confirmation inside the vault did more than expose a deception. It redirected the entire investigation. What began as a suspicious roadside discovery had now evolved into something far more controlled and deliberate. The focus moved quickly away from unknown outsiders and toward those who had the ability to enter, observe, and leave without raising alarm. Inside the palace, the process became methodical. Access records from the past several months were pulled without delay. Every individual who had clearance near the vault was listed, from senior staff to technical personnel. There were no assumptions, only verification. Each entry was examined closely. Times, movements, and patterns were compared against internal logs. At the same time, investigators began to look beyond physical access. Financial records were reviewed with equal precision. Sudden transfers, unusual. Deposits or unexplained activity became points of interest. Communication data followed. Call histories, device locations, and timing were mapped carefully, building a quiet but detailed picture of movement behind the scenes. What started to emerge was not obvious at first. There were no immediate confessions or clear links. Instead, there were small inconsistencies, subtle overlaps, a pattern that did not belong. As these fragments were placed together, the direction of suspicion shifted further inward. This was not a random act. It carried the structure of planning. The timing alone suggested awareness of royal schedules and internal routines. The absence of forced entry confirmed that whoever was responsible had not needed to break in. They had been allowed close enough. Within this tightening circle, one connection began to draw quiet attention. The name did not appear loudly. It was not announced or discussed openly. It surfaced gradually, through links that aligned just enough to raise concern. A location trace that matched a key area, a communication detail that pointed toward proximity, a relationship that connected influence to access. That name was Annabelle Elliott. For years, she had remained largely outside the direct focus of royal scrutiny. Known as the sister of Camilla Parker Bowles, she had existed on the edge of public attention, present but not central. Her position allowed familiarity without constant observation. It was a place of quiet distance, one that rarely attracted suspicion. That distance was now closing. Internally, the reaction was immediate, though carefully contained. No public statements were made. No accusations were spoken beyond secure rooms. But the atmosphere changed. The investigation, once broad, began to narrow with purpose. Attention fixed on connections tied to her name, her movements, and her possible reach. There was still no final conclusion, no direct confirmation. But the alignment was enough to trigger a deeper level of concern. Because if the emerging pattern was correct, this was no longer just about access. It was about proximity to power, and that possibility carried consequences far beyond the vault itself. Patterns begin to align, but nothing is confirmed. No names spoken, no truths declared. Yet one question refuses to stay buried. If access wasn't the real advantage, then who moved this close to power without being seen? And what were they truly trying to change? Stay with us. A plan rebuilt from fragments. As the focus tightened around Annabelle Elliott, the investigation moved into a deeper and far more calculated phase. It was no longer about simply identifying who might be involved. That stage had already begun to narrow. What mattered now was understanding how an operation of this level could have unfolded without a single visible disruption. There were no confessions to rely on, no clear moment where everything pointed in one direction. Instead, the truth existed in fragments, scattered across records, timelines, and quiet traces left behind. Investigators began rebuilding the sequence from the ground up, treating every detail as part of a larger structure that had yet to fully reveal itself. The first meaningful breakthrough came from beyond the United Kingdom. Financial movements and communication patterns began to stretch outward, leading to a connection in Zurich. It was not a coincidence. Zurich was known for precision craftsmanship, especially in the production of high-level replicas used by museums and elite private collectors. This detail aligned perfectly with what had already been discovered inside the vault. The tiara resting under glass was not original. It was a carefully constructed copy, designed with enough accuracy to pass initial inspection. From that point, the timeline began to form with greater clarity. Months earlier, the replica had almost certainly been commissioned using exact measurements and detailed visual references. This was not an estimate or a rough imitation. Whoever arranged it had access to precise information about the original piece. Every angle, every setting, every fine detail had been studied and reproduced with intention. It required time, resources, and a level of access that could not be explained from the outside. That realization shifted the focus inward once again. There were no signs of forced entry into the vault. No alarms triggered. No indication of an external breach. This meant the system itself had been used, not broken. Access codes had been entered correctly. Security routines had been understood and followed. Even the camera placements had been accounted for in advance. Investigators uncovered a brief anomaly within the surveillance system, a small gap where visibility dropped for just a few minutes. It was not long enough to raise immediate suspicion, but it was precise enough to allow controlled movement. This was not a chance. It was timing. At that point, the full complexity of the operation became impossible to ignore. It was not the work of a single individual. The evidence pointed toward a structured chain of involvement. Someone with authorized access, someone with technical awareness, someone capable of executing a physical transfer without leaving obvious signs. Each role connected seamlessly to the next, forming a network that operated quietly beneath layers of trust and routine. At the outer edge of that network sat the final link, Marcus Hale. His position now fits clearly within the larger design. He was not the architect of the plan, nor the individual who entered the vault. He was the transporter, the final step in a carefully arranged sequence. The person tasked with moving the real Tiara away from its original location, without fully understanding the weight of what he carried. His earlier panic during the traffic stop began to take on new meaning. It was no longer seen as simple fear. It reflected partial awareness. He understood enough to feel the danger, but not enough to control or escape it. By the time investigators reached this stage, the structure of the plan was no longer hidden. It had been developed over time, built through access, precision, and coordination, carried out without force, without noise, and without immediate detection. And at the center of it all, the lines of connection continued to circle back toward a name that had once remained quietly in the background. What if the quietest figure in the room was never on the sidelines, but at the very center of a plan built with precision, silence, and perfect timing? And how did no one notice until it was already too late? Stay tuned. A carefully laid snare. By the time the reconstruction pointed clearly toward a coordinated network, the investigation reached a decisive moment. The pieces were no longer scattered. They were aligned just enough to act. At the center of that next move stood Marcus Hale, the man who had unknowingly become the final link in a much larger operation. Inside Hammersmith Police Station, the atmosphere was controlled, but intense. Under questioning, Marcus repeated what he had said before. He was only the driver. He had been paid to transport a package and nothing more. But this time, the approach was different. Investigators did not challenge him with force. They presented him with facts: the transfer of funds into his account, the timing, the route he had taken. Each detail closed in around him until resistance no longer held. Then came the instruction. He was going to make a call. The number was traced from his previous contact. It had already drawn attention due to its proximity to key locations near Kensington. Now, it would be used as a doorway. Marcus was told exactly what to say. His voice needed to sound urgent, convincing, real. He would claim there was trouble, that he could not continue to the original destination, and that the drop point had to change. The call was placed. Every word was monitored, every second recorded. When the voice answered on the other end, it was calm, controlled, and unmistakably composed. Marcus delivered the message as instructed, his fear no longer entirely in act. There was a pause, a moment where everything could have shifted in another direction. Then the response came, brief and decisive. The new location was accepted. The line went silent. That was all the confirmation needed. From that point forward, the operation expanded rapidly. Surveillance units were deployed across North London, focusing on the newly arranged meeting point near the A406. Unmarked vehicles positioned themselves at a distance, blending into the environment. Traffic cameras were integrated into the monitoring system. Movement would be tracked long before arrival. At Kensington, coordination between royal security and law enforcement tightened further. Prince William remained closely informed as updates came in. There was no room for error. Whoever responded to that call was no longer just a suspect. They were now walking directly into a controlled environment designed to reveal the truth. The tension built steadily as the plan moved into place. This was no longer about gathering information. It was about confirmation. About seeing who would step forward when the final link in the chain appeared to break. Every unit involved understood the weight of what was coming. The timing had to be exact. The response had to be immediate. Because somewhere beyond the silence, someone with far more at stake had already made a decision, and they were now on their way. Every move was calculated, every second closing in on the truth. But when the chain finally appeared to break, one question remained. Who would risk everything to step forward, knowing the trap was already set? And what were they desperate to protect? Keep watching. The night everything collapsed. The silence around the abandoned warehouse did not feel natural. It was the kind of stillness that carried intention, as if the entire area was waiting. Streetlights flickered weakly against the cold concrete, casting long shadows across the empty ground. From a distance, nothing seemed unusual. But hidden beyond sight, vehicles were already in position. Officers remained motionless, eyes fixed, every movement calculated and restrained. Shortly before 2 a.m., headlights appeared in the distance. A dark vehicle approached slowly, cutting through the quiet with controlled precision. It came to a stop near the entrance, engine fading into silence. The driver stepped out. Annabelle Elliott had arrived. There was no hesitation in her movement. She carried a heavy black bag in one hand, her pace steady, her focus fixed ahead. To anyone watching closely, the tension was there, just beneath the surface. This was not a routine exchange. It was a moment she clearly understood the importance of. Every step brought her deeper into a space she believed was still under her control. She called out softly, expecting a response. None came. The emptiness answered her instead. For a brief second, uncertainty crossed her expression. It was small, almost invisible, but enough to reveal that something did not feel right. She took another step forward, adjusting her grip on the bag, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Then everything changed. Light flooded the scene without warning. Headlights burst on from multiple directions at once, cutting through the shadows and locking the space in place. Voices followed immediately, sharp and commanding, leaving no room for confusion. Officers moved in with precision, surrounding the area before there was time to react. Annabelle froze. The bag slipped from her hand. As it struck the ground, a faint metallic sound echoed through the air. It was quiet, but unmistakable. In that single moment, the final piece of uncertainty disappeared. Whatever had been hidden inside was no longer just suspected. It was confirmed. Officers closed in, their formation tight, their focus unwavering. There was no chaos, no struggle. The operation had been planned too carefully for that. A voice stepped forward, clear and controlled, formally identifying the charges. Conspiracy. Misappropriation of royal property. Words that carried weight far beyond the scene itself. Annabelle did not resist. She stood still, her gaze drawn to the bag at her feet. For the first time, the reality of the situation settled in. This was no longer a plan in motion. There was no adjustment left to make, no path to redirect what had begun. The structure that had been built so carefully had collapsed in an instant. The tiara, now recovered, was no longer just an object. It had become evidence. And as the officers secured the scene and moved to take her into custody, the truth that had been hidden beneath layers of precision and control was no longer contained. She froze as the truth settled in, the plan collapsing at her feet, the tiara now undeniable evidence. But was this the end of a carefully hidden operation, or the moment a deeper royal secret finally began to surface? When the truth reached the palace walls, the arrest at the warehouse did not remain contained for long. What happened in that isolated corner of North London began to move quickly through official channels, reaching the highest level of the royal household within hours. By the time the early morning light touched the city, the situation had already transformed into a full palace crisis. Inside Kensington, the atmosphere shifted from controlled investigation to urgent response. Reports were delivered in precise detail. The recovery of the tiara, the arrest of Annabelle Elliott, the evidence secured at the scene. Each update added weight to what was becoming impossible to ignore. This was no longer a contained incident. It had crossed into the core of the institution. Attention turned immediately toward Camilla Parker Bowles. Her connection to Annabelle could not be separated from the unfolding events. Investigators had not yet spoken publicly, but internally, the implications were clear. The network that had been carefully traced, the access that had been used, and the coordination that had taken place all pointed toward a level of involvement that could not be dismissed as distant or accidental. An emergency meeting was called without delay. Senior members of the royal family gathered under tense conditions, joined by legal advisors and security officials. At the center of it all stood Prince William. His role had shifted from oversight to decision. The information placed before him was complete enough to act, yet heavy enough to demand absolute clarity. The discussion did not stretch into uncertainty. It moved with a directness shaped by the seriousness of the moment. There was no room for hesitation. The integrity of the institution, already under pressure, now depended on how this would be handled. The outcome was decisive. Camilla was formally implicated in connection with the conspiracy. The response followed immediately. Her royal titles and privileges were stripped. Her position within the inner circle was removed without delay. Legal proceedings were set in motion, not only for her, but for all individuals identified within the network that had carried out the operation. The chain that had extended from Zurich to London began to break apart under coordinated enforcement. Arrests followed across multiple locations, dismantling what had once operated quietly behind layers of planning. At the same time, the recovered tiara was returned. Under strict supervision, it was placed back inside the vault from which it had been taken. The process was handled with a level of care that reflected more than security. It carried meaning. The object itself was not simply valuable. It represented something far deeper, tied to memory, history, and public sentiment connected to Princess Diana. News of the events spread rapidly beyond palace walls. Across the public, the reaction was immediate and intense. There was anger, but also a strong sense of protection toward what Diana represented. For many, this was not viewed as a simple act of theft. It felt personal. The idea that something connected to her legacy had been targeted struck a deeper chord. At the same time, there was recognition of the response. The decision to act openly, rather than conceal, carried its own weight. Within the palace, the silence that followed was heavier than before. Because what had been uncovered was not just a breach of security. It revealed something more difficult to confront. Trust had been used, access had been exploited, and the intention behind it reached beyond material value. It was not simply about taking something away. It was about removing what it stood for. So, what do you think? Was this a calculated attempt to erase Princess Diana's legacy from within? Or something even deeper we haven't seen yet? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.